Shout out to Julian Banks. Yes, sir. And I am Big Snoop Dogg.
Welcome back to another episode of After Hours. I'm your host, Julian Banks. We are here with Alisa Jacobs. Alisa is the co-founder and co-CEO of Loop Studios. Loop is a strategy, branding, and experiential agency. She's a serial entrepreneur, and she's a community builder in Web3. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, of course,
I'm happy to be here. So I want to jump into your company, Loop Studios. In your mission statement, there was a mantra that really stood out to me, which was dynamic adaptability, cultural celebration, and radical transparency. So I'm curious to see how those elements kind of fuse together and affect and transform the brands that you work with and then their community and culture.
I love that. And I have to say, as many years as we've been doing Loop, it's the first time anyone's ever asked that. And so It says a lot about just your attention to detail and priorities, because our mantra as a tagline is culture over everything. But our principles, our mission, our vision is really rooted in those things. So in terms of dynamic adaptability, it's because we're a lean, mean startup, right? And the reality is when you're working with big corporate 100 companies and really cool startups helping them start up, there's so much nimbleness that needs to happen. You need to be able to flex to fit. You need to be really adaptive, but also just thoughtful and proactive about those changes. And we really consider ourselves a change agency. So that dynamism and that energy is something we really take pride in, but also just being able to move and change as we need to. As far as cultural celebration goes, that's the heartbeat of the agency. You know, my partner Antoinette Williams and I have started this as an all-women's organization. We now have some boys too, but it's very diverse, it's very women-centric, and it's really about not only integrating big brands in culture, but in an authentic way. So celebrating instead of appropriating and really bringing funds into the community, not just leveraging the community for consumerism. And then radical accountability, I think, is really around transparency and radical transparency in that sense of just honesty and being really candid, really owning your shit, frankly, both inside out as like entrepreneurs and founders, but also for the brands that we work with. Like we really encourage them to be genuine and honest and build relationships with the consumer, because your audience won't become a fan base unless you can really have that trust. And I think brand trust is more important than almost any other metric.
It seems like those ethos kind of align with Web3 as well. So it's like you have decentralization, transparency, user control, sovereignty. But how do you envision the evolution of Web3? And what challenges do you foresee on the road to like widespread adoption?
I think that's a great question. And I know we've had a lot of fun in the Web3 space.
That's kind of where we met,
Yeah. I think that Web3 is for builders. And I think that's the most important thing. I think that's one of the values we related on and really connected on as friends. And I think that for me, and this is maybe counterculture, a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but from the very beginning of the adoption of Web3, of NFTs, of digital collectibles, of the blockchain, of crypto, of whatever piece of that metaverse world you want to kind of gravitate towards, for me, it's always about expansion and extension. And so even when we were really active in the education and the panels and everything, I think it was never about a new industry to me. I've never seen Web3 as a new industry. I think it's the internet's, right? At the end of the day, it is the next wave of technology and how we integrate it with brands, with culture, with society. And so to me, it's less about what's happening in Web3 and more about what is technology doing to further brands and the human experience. So whether that's AR, VR, whether that's Web3, whether that's AI now, it's all in the same bucket to me of growth. How do we make things more efficient, more interactive? How do we not dissolve jobs but create new jobs and transform? And I've said it from the get-go, I think it's really requiring stewards and shepherds in the space. And if you don't have folks that are really accountable to doing the right thing, whatever the right thing means, it's the wild, wild west. And it is going to destroy humanity if it's left unchecked. But it also can be the greatest tool to further humanity and further brand culture, further what we build, what we make, what invention and IP looks like faster than ever. So Web3 specifically, I think that blockchain isn't going anywhere. I think that people want transparency and they want to be able to connect their worlds. So instead of having mixed reality, it's really merged realities. So I'll give an example. If I'm buying products, I would love to have both a digital iteration of that collectible and a physical piece, right? Whether that's art, whether that's a sneaker, whether that's a t-shirt, memorabilia in sports, paraphernalia for, music, whatever it might be. But on top of that, I want to know the ownership, because if you think about a Rolex or certain car titles or even, education certificates, all of the different things, whatever we own intellectually or as a possession, I think it's important to have receipts. And I think that the blockchain really allows for that credibility, that credentialing, and just that tracking system to know who's got what. And I think people can say a lot and do a lot, but that is the piece that will never get lost, no matter what we call it in the future, is that credential and that the tracking, right? It's just the authentication, if you will.
So how can these traditional brands kind of make that foray into the digital realm? Is it tokenizing media? Is it building NFTs, empowering their user base?
So how do brands leverage Web3 and technology to enter that digital realm? I think it's less of a transition and more of an expansion. I think it can feel very disingenuous if, as a brand, you store your... Let me rephrase that. I think it's very disingenuous for a brand to tell different stories to different audiences on different platforms. Just like the way we use social media, you have to optimize, and it's like different versions of your resume to get the job that makes sense, but it's not different backgrounds, right? So sure, you're going to lead with a certain message that works well on Instagram versus TikTok versus Facebook versus whatever other platform you might be on, and YouTube might be a different length of content or what asset might be the best cover art. So you're going to tweak it, right? You're going to adapt in that sense. But I think that if you're going to expand your brand offering and your product portfolio digitally, it has to still feel congruent. It has to synchronize, and it has to feel interdependent, neither codependent nor independent. So for a big brand that wants to kind of come into this very nimble, sometimes territorial, but very tribal space, I think it's really just offering value and how are you giving more, not how are you taking more from the community. So I actually think the biggest value for creating fandom is connection and incentivization. So I think that the reward systems, if you think about even the gamified Starbucks and loyalty programs, I think that's one really easy way that any brand, small or large, can really connect more, because it gives a gamified opportunity for you to, yes, tokenize, but also get more, do more, learn more, have earlier access, special offerings, and also have affinity. So I said that brand trust is really important, but I think affinity and sense of belonging, because people mix up brand love or adoration with affinity. Affinity isn't about whether I like your brand or not. It's whether I think that's a brand for me. And to build community around a brand, affinity is actually more important, because our sense of belonging, not fitting in, because fitting in is literally the opposite of belonging. Because you've decided that you don't belong, so you have to change yourself.
Love that,
right? So if we have a sense of belonging and we both love whatever product, we're going to be able to also bring that community back offline. So we've already identified that we love the same thing. We are building loyalty points, we're connecting on and offline, we have purchased physical products, we might have things in our wallet or on the blockchain. The experiential is so different when we already know that we care, our psychographics are aligned. So even if we come from totally different backgrounds, race, gender, geography, you name it, we have a kindred spirit of something that we love, right? And people tend to bond over what they love or what they hate. We're a polarized society. So if you can bond over what you love, then when you create events on or offline, then when you create special offerings or drops or capsule collections, all of that stuff becomes really coveted and really connective. So now that's where you have community and engagement and the opportunity to really build something beyond whatever the core offering is.
Nice. What are some brands that you've worked with, that your favorite events and activations and things like that?
Oh gosh.
So many, but...
I'm going to totally date myself, but I've been doing experiential for over 20 years. So I was actually illegally throwing parties at the clubs in college and like doing everything from, working with clubs and hip hop and things like that to music and sports. And I've had a lot of events in my day. I remember when I was at Diageo for several years, leading culture and partnerships and working on some of the coolest, luxury and luxury brands, but also really culturally relevant brands. And so I got to work on a lot of fun stuff. We did the partnerships with New York Fashion Week and the NBA and the Grammys. And I was so proud to see the teams activate in a totally different, groundbreaking way for the Oscars this year, because the Don Julio partnership with the Oscars and Jimmy Kimmel was a 13-year partnership. But the Oscars had never allowed a brand integration in-show in the history of the program.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
And it was, a star of the show with Guillermo and Jimmy. And
such a good event.
It was
so good.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And I felt like I was watching like a kid that I helped nanny.
This is your baby,
like valedictorian at college or something. Yeah. And so many of the folks that I worked with are still on the brand. There was so much pride in that. But I think it's a great example of, and I'll come back to the real question, which is the ones that we've done, but seeing that go from just, integration on the Jimmy Kimmel show and, in Vanity Fair and the Governor's Ball and all these different things, it's so cool seeing it show up in culture and entertainment. And I know we think TV is dead and everything's streamers and this, that, and the other, but it doesn't get bigger than the big shows, whether that's the Grammys, the Oscars, the Super Bowl, NBA All-Stars. Like in every category of culture, there's still that culminating moment. So if you can hijack or integrate in that climactic moment, everything else falls out of that, right? It's like the stardust. So that I found really exciting, but I also loved working on stuff for Don Julio that was really much more niche. Like we did a rollout with The Infatuation, which has EatsCon and is a really great foodie organization that has grown monumentally. Andrew Steinhall, just brilliant founder who you should meet anyway. But we did a program that was actually working with taquerias, like local taquerias and family-owned restaurants to bring in the master distiller at the time and do these amazing, really culturally authentic pop-ups, but also artistic murals on the entire city block and the buildings to draw foot traffic. And then it was an immersive campaign. And then we also did stuff with Barry's Boot Camp that was really trailblazing at the time because you weren't allowed to work in fitness if you were in liquor. If it was sort of like this counterintuitive. Well, I won't say you weren't allowed to, but Diageo had a very strict code of conduct. And so anything that implied that it was going to give you run faster, be better, more charismatic, it was very like authentic and but responsible marketing, right? So we had a code of conduct. And so I almost lost my job a couple times. Thank goodness for Paula and some of the best lawyers I've ever met for working with me on it. But we ended up getting it pushed through, and it was so successful because it was about culture. Because at the time, it was like SoulCycle was popping off, and Barry's Boot Camp, and Rumble was becoming a thing. And it was cult culture. CrossFit was literally cult culture, right? And brands didn't know how to be a part of it because you can't like go drink and work out, right? But you had these boozy brunches after a bunch of girlfriends and their Lululemon went to SoulCycle. And you had this community you were building with your friends with shared values that you also were maybe wanting healthier cocktails or lower ABV or, drink your calories instead of eat your calories. But it was a culture. It was not about running after you drank, right? It was none of that. So Barry's Boot Camp was an awesome one. And when we had rolled that out, again, what I like with events is we had the events, right? We had an awesome launch with Hannah Bronfman and all of these cool pop-ups. But then it was also integrated in the marketplace. So the founder had sort of like Barry's approved cocktails, right, that were like better for you, if you will. And so we had partnerships with bars all over New York where you could actually get this custom menu. So it was physical, it was emotionally charged, right? But it was also digital content, social content, influencer seating, really across the board. So all of the experiential that I love the most has been immersive before there was immersive technology. So now you can implement the metaverse, or we did a phygital launch where like you were actually trying on the drop of the wardrobe.
Launch. Yeah, that was
great. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, it was so fun.
Yeah, so it's like we actually had a literal on and offline party at the same time.
Yeah,
and
just a combination of everything.
amazing.
Yeah.
But before that ever existed, mixed reality really meant, how do I engage with this with people that aren't here?
Right.
At its simplest, right? And so way back, and I mean 10 years ago, like I would say even before 2014, but say around 2014, even when we were working with like Revolve on the first Revolve Fest and their Hamptons pop-ups, one of the things I thought was so strategic that they got really right, and shout out to Michael and Risa because they've done a lot right with influencer partnerships, but also then partnering to create collections with them, was we already know people are going to take out their phones, right? Influencers or not, they want beautiful content, they want to share, there's the FOMO effect, there's the bragging rights, a little bit of some of the clout chasing or sharing, but also just if you're going to do that and you want people to still be present, how do you both bring in a broader audience and have people enjoy the experience? And one of the things I think they really mastered, and I was really proud to be a part of, we did the first, before everyone was doing all the swing sets, we did the first branded swing set as like a installation. So these, what we call KBAs, key brand assets. So like when a brand has like a cart or a certain bar style or like something where it's like it's that thing is the signature fill in the blank brand's thing.
Their aesthetic kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a signature. It might be Samsung doing like some sort of technical tutorial, or it might be Kettle One doing a beautiful like farmer's market cart for Kettle One Botanicals. Yeah. Whatever it is, like when I see that, that's the Patron, whatever. What I loved that Revolve did was these massive photo moments. And it's not that it was the first to do it, but it was that the photo moments became the key brand assets. And it didn't matter what the photo moment was, whether it was a giant flower wall that said Revolve or whether it was some mirrored thing. I remember when they would have flowers pouring out of a car. It was like a Corvette or something at Coachella.
Yeah.
But when you create destination moments to bridge realities, even if it's just social media, it allows people to be more present outside of those moments. So yes, you get like the influencer influx where everyone just wants to be seen in that like that visual, but you actually have more fun and let your hair down in other aspects and other parts of the event because you're like, okay, I walked the red carpet, check. It's almost like that. So I think that as we bring in more technology, that's something we need to consider. Is I worry sometimes, and as an elder millennial now, I worry about the kids with like, it's like a lot of Gen Z and younger don't even know how to interact without their phones.
It's true. Some of these events, you just see them on their phone and they have this lively social media presence. And then it's that interaction is
they're wildly socially awkward.
Yeah.
And it's also like, look, with a lot of the kids that were a little bit younger than us, think about the age that people entered the pandemic. So those 2 years of quarantine, depending on what age you were really formative years for people socially. So if you were a teenager or like in college or early 20s during that period, it really affected your social skills and it created a lot of anxiety and paranoia and just, please don't touch me, social distancing. So that social distancing made us more connected on social media and less social in person, where sometimes the amount of time that we've been making eye contact would have freaked someone out already. They would have been out the door.
Exactly.
Are you a sociopath?
Yeah.
We grew up, or I grew up at least, thinking that that was a sign of respect, of presence, of listening, of connection. But people don't do that anymore. So I actually think it's important to compartmentalize that in the events experience so that people do want to share, they do want to help you brand and amplify whatever it is that the reason for the event, but also to have fun. I think, I lived in New York for 6 years, and when I moved back to LA, granted it was post-pandemic, everything had changed. I was just like, man, people don't like to have fun anymore. And I'm not even I'm not a big drinker, I'm not like a partier, but just even at a coffee shop, even at a grocery store, even at church, wherever you might be out in the world, there's certain places where it's normalized to be like, hey, what's your name?
Yeah.
Or even hello at a bar. And I think in LA post-pandemic, I was like, oh, everyone's just really segmented.
Yeah.
And I became that way too, really kind of just isolated and more to myself. But I saw something online the other day that made me hysterically laugh. it was some girl doing I wish I could credit her because I don't remember her name, but she was doing some spoof on like if adults acted like kids to make new friends. Mm-hmm. And it was like, poking someone, be like, hey, want to be my friend? Hey, want to be my friend? Or like at the beach, like turning around, be like, hey, want to go play? Like, can you imagine if you were like at the beach and someone just like threw a ball at you and was like, hey, want to go play? You look cool.
Yeah, you'd be arrested.
You'd be like, you're a psycho.
Yeah.
But that's awesome.
Yeah.
I wish we did more of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need more. And whether that's through brands and marketing and events or just as people out in the world to bring those guards down a little bit where we can just interact.
Yeah.
That said, it's weird out here in these streets and there's a lot of weirdos and like you don't necessarily want strangers as friends. But I do really think that we could just connect more offline to even embrace what's coming technologically. And I think that's where the phone piece is tricky, right? Yeah. Because so I have a lot of conflict with that concept. And I have conflict with that concept only because as a brand marketer and brand builder, I want to amplify. I want to see it go everywhere. I want virality. I want to help us tell the story, right? So the more buzzy, the more amplified, the more content, the better. It's free advertising. Yeah. But as a human and as a event goer or as a consumer, I also just want to enjoy the experience of the art sometimes. And so I would say the balance of that is, sometimes you're bringing in live music or experiences, but then everyone's on their phone watching it on their phone. Yeah. Like not even watching it and holding it up, but making sure it's in shot. So you might as well not be there. And I think that's something that Dave Chappelle and other like OGs have really gotten right. And nothing gives me a panic attack like having to lock my phone. But if you are at an event or a comedy show or something that's private for a Dave Chappelle, and there's a handful of others that do it, and some just private. I mean, to be candid, like some of our events, we just do that too, where like after you do your little photo moment, we have a locker for your phones.
Oh, really? Okay.
Or they'll have like the case where it closes and you have to get it magnetized to leave.
Wow, okay.
I'm not going to lie, it's terrifying. And I feel like if I had, a babysitter to deal with or was like, sometimes I'm coordinating getting other people in and I'm like, out of luck, I don't have my phone anymore.
Yeah.
But it's so freeing. I think that we're so all attached and so addicted to checking too. Yeah. It's not just that we need to talk to someone. We're not addicted to being connected. We're addicted literally to like the status update,
feedback loop, yeah.
And you might not even have a new message, but you're like checking it every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So when you're freed of that, I actually felt like it was a social detox, even if it's just for a couple of hours. Once you get past that really uncomfortable, I feel abandoned and alone, right? Because like even if you're with your friends, it's like no one can get to me. Once you get through that little window, you're like, I feel so liberated. No one can get to me.
But we're in this kind of confluence of AI, tech, Web3, NFTs right now. We met through the NFT in the midst of that craze, then the bear market, and now back to kind of this euphoria, really. But what do you see? So like we see so many stratospheric valuations for all these different companies that are coming out, and every entrepreneur wants to start like the next big AI company, which is amazing.
Or thinks they're an AI expert already.
Yeah, already. So am I just transitioning of company as to AI now? But we kind of started at these large monolithic companies, Diageo. So how important is that to kind of start out, build these foundational elements, maybe take a humbling pay cut, internships, build mentors, and build that up and then extrapolate?
Really great question, honestly. I think we're always going to feel like our approach was the right approach if it worked. So if you ask someone, it's human nature. So if you ask someone that never went to college, never worked corporate, started their first whatever on a shoestring budget at 20-something, now hired an entire executive staff older than them, killing it, making millions, they're going to tell you, jump in.
Do that, yeah.
If you talk to someone who went the more linear approach and even more linear than you or I, like literally like mailroom to assistant to, right? Like even within the corporate marketing world, it's like associate or assistant coordinator and then marketing or product manager and then director and then VP and then SVP. It's very linear, very hierarchical. I have a little bit of a hybrid perspective. And I think that you need both, but you can come from either direction. But you have to know your blind spots, and it all comes down to hiring smarter or partnering smarter. Because for me, I actually had a little bit of a sandwich where I went to college. I loved college, honestly. I don't know why I graduated early. I was doing college really well.
This is Maryland?
Yeah, proud Terp. But I feel like the college experience for me wasn't about the education. I could have gotten communication studies and minoring in Spanish and social behavioral, just real world university and reading. I'm an avid, fervent reader. So like, I feel like I've learned more from reading and experiences and internships outside of school than any of my classes. But I think from a social and networking and relationship standpoint, college taught me everything. I was mentored by the best of the best in sports. I was working for the NFL and the NFLPA and the Redskins when it was still the Redskins. I was like vice president of the Honor Society and had a trending radio show, and like I did everything. I stacked insane credits on 2 days for my junior year was my senior year to work 3 days a week full time. Never slept, was throwing parties at nighttime. Like, I honestly don't know how
did you get
I honestly don't know. I
crazy.
look back, I'm not even joking, because I'm still pretty high-functioning ADHD, right? But, like, I look back and I was like, did I sleep at all? Like, I really, because I also was someone who would have to lie to myself about deadlines because I actually work really well under pressure. And so I was a procrastinator and a perfectionist, like I think a lot of undiagnosed high-functioning ADHD people are. And so I would have to cram or pull an all-nighter to be effective. And so I would lie to myself about deadlines, kill myself, stay up all night, be up for 48 hours, didn't do drugs, wasn't big on caffeine. So it was like a tough on my body 48 hours. And then find out my paper wasn't due until the next class and have time to edit it. Or realize that the final was the next day and I had put it on my calendar wrong. I did it on purpose. Now I can't trick myself because I did it so much, I can't trick myself. But I would need that. I would need that because I was so intense. But that said, I interned for really corporate entities since I was 16. From 16 to 26, I was doing internships and apprenticeships for everything from fashion designers to, the NFL, things like that. When I got into my 20s, all of my first jobs were basically the number 2 to the number 1 of a lean startup. So our clients were all major corporate entities, and this ranged from a fashion marketing startup to a really incredible creative agency in advertising to even being a headhunter, right, at an executive recruiting firm, but hiring the CTOs, the heads of sales, heads of marketing, et cetera, at the biggest companies in the world. So my starting point was actually learning the ropes as an entrepreneur, literally through osmosis, right? Like I was shadowing. I was the number 2, so I was shadowing since I was 23. I was shadowing from an events company to a marketing agency to advertising to sports. And then all of our clients, so I had to learn the politics and the bureaucracy and the structure from a client services perspective, because we were working with Amazon and Nike and Westfield and Yahoo and Gap and Google and like companies you had to know the ropes. Right. So I felt like I had a little bit of imposter complex because when you're 26 giving massive workshops and like speaking to 200 HR executives at Nike campus, when I'd be lucky if I'd got a job there, right? Like I'm training, you have to have a growth spurt because you're so big for your britches, right? And so I would just say that transition for me was, okay, I'm either going to go back to school to get an MBA, because this was before it was like so normalized for the youth to lead, right? You still had to like earn your stripes, hustle culture, team no sleep. Everything was about work harder, not smarter. So I thought I needed to go back to get an MBA or a job at fill in the blank number 1 of its vertical. So it was literally only a handful I would have considered. It would have been Amazon, Apple, Nike, Diageo, like whatever the number 1 multi-billion-dollar multinational conglomerate was. I think I talked to Nestle, P&G, portfolio companies, CPG. So when I got the job at Diageo, and honestly, I was one of the, besides my boss and maybe 2 other executives at corporate, everyone else had an MBA out of hundreds of full-time employees. And I was very fortunate to get the job, but I also brought something so different because it was so out-of-the-box thinking that unintentionally I was very disruptive, right? But I went to corporate to learn what I felt I would have at B school, which was ops, admin, finance, accountability, team structure, understanding the navigation of politics, everything I hated, what would be like my ick folder. I used to call it my ick folder, like all the stuff I needed to get done but I didn't really want to do. Had I not done that, there's no way in hell I could have been a venture-backed CEO in a tech space right after. No way, because even though I was good at it, I had no proof of my experience in building teams, running companies, multi-million-dollar P&Ls, all of the really technical operational stuff I had to learn immersively in the field. And so then I went into the startup world. And while I had already had my agency, it was freelancing and consulting. It was really when I was leaving Diageo that Antoinette and I started to build this out as a brand. Yeah. Loop. Mm-hmm. And now Loop is a change agency. And as you said, it's strategic, it's experiential, it's PR, it's events, and a lot of influencer and celebrity stuff. But we're also building out what brand building is. So like we're working with clients on like actually launching their investment fund or their nonprofit or investment into everything from entertainment to hospitality, and what it looks like to start building equity and hybrid models from a brand studio perspective where it's IP and productization and content. So it's a slow build, but I felt that I really needed to learn those ropes to be able to trust anyone else to do it, right?
Yeah.
So then I got into the scrappy entrepreneurial space. Obviously, you know my track record, but in the gaming space and in the tech space and all of that, both as an advisor and as a founding CEO, but also as an advisor and a consultant. But I felt that I was able to really be that scrappy because I had the foundation that you asked about. That said, I think you can retrofit it. I think that you can just jump in, figure it out, have some wins, and then you need to overlay structure or surround yourself with building out that infrastructure. So I don't think that there's a right or wrong entry point of this binary structure first or entrepreneurialism first. But I think that the art and the science have to merge. And by any means necessary, the most successful companies have that balance of enough structure to be dangerous, because you can't have spontaneity without stability, right? Like if I think about just as an individual, right? Say I was a 9-to-5er, I have a salary, et cetera. If I'm feeling financially stuck, I'm going to be selling my hour by the billable hour. And then I might be making a lot of money, but I don't have spontaneity, even though I have stability, because I'm now stuck, right? Or I might have a ton of money, but not have time off. So it's sort of like if you want these duality models, right, to work, you really have to have a little bit of both. So when you are stable, you can be more spontaneous. And I think it's just finding that happy medium.
So you've kind of had this hybrid approach throughout.
I don't think it was intentional.
Yeah.
I don't think I had an intentional approach to building my career. I think that I had incredible relationships, I'm a really fast learner, and I'm incredibly curious. I think being curious and being reliable are the two things. I'm relentless, I'm reliable, and I'm fiercely curious. And I think that when you couple that persona or personality type with passion and purpose and people, it doesn't matter how everything comes together.
Sure.
But when I think about it, I've really only always had a student's mentality. So whether I was interning, apprenticing, even when I was the senior leader at organizations, I was taking on jobs that were outside of not only my pay grade, but also my skill set, because I wanted to learn. And so I think that if you are really willing to, and you asked this earlier, it's like, do you have to humble yourself at times? I did do that. I took almost a 40% pay cut to go to Diageo. I had been a director since I was 23. I started as a manager going back into corporate. And it doesn't matter if it's inflated, deflated, it doesn't matter the why, because I think that's just what happens with any corporate company. But the benefits of what I was learning, it was like, otherwise I would have been paying to go back to school. So for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm making less for this period of time, which, 5-6 years, but my access, my education, my opportunities, and, shout out to Dan Sanborn, who was one of the visionaries, in my opinion, that built the department. He's now partners actually with Jimmy Kimmel on Wheelhouse and some other endeavors. But I always used to joke with him, and he'll kill me if he sees this, but that it was like the worst boss and best ex-boss I was ever going to have while I was still working for him, right?
You said that? Or?
I would say that because he was a lead by example type of guy.
Okay.
And so he was not the guy that was going to coddle you or necessarily even pat you on the back. You were going to see how to do it by how he was doing it. And he was disruptive and visionary, but masterful at understanding the politics and the stakeholder management. And so I think that I learned so much from him, even as I used to joke as like an absentee dad, right? But I learned so much from him. And he's now still a dear friend. I'm sure there's lots we'll do together. But I feel like sometimes you need those people to learn from, just like you need people like me who are a little bit more hands-on. I'm a little more, for better and for worse, mentoring, coddling, mothering in certain ways, because I wish I had that in other ways. As a woman in business, I never had women in business that taught me the ropes or how to navigate as a woman in business. I had amazing male mentors and I had amazing examples. But honestly, until spending time with Esty Portnoy, who is, I don't know if you know her, but she's Jordan's business manager and actually one of the executive producers on The Last Dance. When we bonded, I realized that I had never actually had like a friend and mentor to admire and aspire to like her. And she had mentored lots of guys, but she had never actually had what she considered a female mentee. And this was like less than 8 years ago. Like this was recent. And so I look at it as, okay, I think we all try to be what we didn't have. And so for me, even within Loop, I think Antoinette and I really wanted to make sure that if you were coming in, because we've only recently started hiring for established skill to fill a role. When we first started building it, we were teaching because we have such an innovative, almost independent production company business structure. And we work with so many different types of clients where we'd be working with Diageo one day, Activision Blizzard another, launching Lobo 1707 with LeBron. You asked about events. That was probably the best event at Rich Paul's house because 48 hours before they said a bunch had gone wrong with production, here's the budget, shoestring budget, make it happen. So aside from the fact that it was a massive success with, I mean, LeBron and Kenya Barris and Michael B. Jordan and Drake and Quavo and you name it attending, no one knew that we had 48 hours to pull off the entire end-to-end event production.
Wow.
Including production, vendors, invites, COVID testing,
So
because this was in the peak pandemic.
These usually take months to do, yeah.
Oh, it was a 4-month lead time. We had maybe 36 hours. And like I said, a very shoestring budget.
Yeah.
But it was incredible. So those type of wins, right? So we have to go from that to working with like a WME-backed venture in NFTs that's very operationally corporate.
Right.
And this isn't going from like month to month. It's like from a Monday to a Wednesday, you have to switch gears between producing an event for thousands to a social media campaign to building out a website to a photo shoot. Like you really have to be dynamic. So we didn't know how to hire for what we needed because we needed unicorns. So we actually hired really smart, young talent that had all of the raw skills and trained. Now we're at a place where it's both, right? We've scaled a bit, so we have both like a series of, we call it kind of like a collection of specialists more than generalists. But you have to have so many moving pieces. But I think some of it like is the mentorship though. I think it gets to a point where you can't be so hands-on with everyone because there's only so much finite time. But there's a great book called like, I think, a CEO only does 3 things or something along those lines. And it's people, culture, and money. That's it. If at a certain point, obviously as a startup, we do everything, so that's different. But at a certain point in the life cycle of a company, if as a CEO you are doing anything that is not directly laddering up to moving people, like HR, the people in the company, culture of the brand and of the actual company, or the bottom line, the money, the revenue, forward, you're wasting your time and you're costing the company time. And so we're getting there. my hands are still in a lot of things, but I think that having a co-CEO is also really important because it's not a monolithic or even monochromatic view on things. And there was periods where I was CEO and periods where Antoinette was CEO, and we really came to the conclusion that while I lean in terms of where I get my energy, marketing, creative, strategy, relationships, bringing things to life, IP. She leans more operations, admin, leadership, business development, and is really strong. We're both very competent across the board. She drives me crazy because I think she's amazing at the marketing stuff and she thinks I'm like super savvy at the ops stuff. But there's a difference between being good at something and it being good for you. And I think that we talk about things in terms of strengths and weaknesses a lot, like strengthen your strengths, mitigate your weaknesses. You can be really strong in a lot of things and it not give you joy or energy. And so I think that when you have the luxury of being able to spend more of your time and attention on the things that make you feel expansive than contracting and that bring you up versus down and energetically you feel accomplished and additive, then there's other things that you might be really good at. I'm great at math. I hate doing it. I used to pretend I was bad at math to try to like fail out of classes because I just didn't want to do it. And I would end up in like advanced calc and I'm like, how did this even happen? Like it was just like, but it doesn't bring me any joy. Like there's no like fun, my brain doesn't work like that where it's like fun, gamification, whatever. I'm just good at it. I don't enjoy it. I'm really good at budgets. But if I can like oversee it and partner with someone that actually likes doing it, that I can do the things that make me happy and fulfilled and purposeful, I think there should be more co-CEOs, honestly.
Do you think because your granddad was the head of PR for Shell,
You have a good memory.
he was a thespian and a Coast Guard,
Yeah.
so that had a breadth of experience, did that enable you to pursue a bunch of different fields or almost imprint that upon you?
I forgot we had that conversation. He was a really special breed. My grandfather went from being the director of Shell. Actually, my grandfather was a traveling actor and a thespian who went into the Coast Guard. He then bullied Shell into hiring him with no education on paper. And just like Diageo, Shell was very corporate. You had to have a college education. It was very by the book, right? And he basically like sat in the office until they would take a meeting with him. And he was very handsome with these ice blue eyes and dirty blonde hair and strapping, military guy. And of course, the receptionist had a crush on him. So he'd bring her a coffee every day and bring his resume, a new copy of his resume every day for 2 weeks. And she was just like, I can't get you an interview. Like, I can keep pushing it. But like, he's like, it's fine. I'll just keep coming until he's available. Did it for 2 weeks. And then there was this oil spill news article on a magazine in the waiting room. And he said to her, I'm going to be right back. My only ask is, I'm going to bring you back something. All I ask is that you make sure your boss sees it. She was smitten. She's like, sure. He goes and rewrites the whole article, comes back, leaves it. By the time he's leaving, I don't know if it was the CMO or the vice president of marketing, whoever it was like, get him in here now. Was hired on the spot, 10 years, director of PR. And so that grit and that delusional belief, not just in manifestation or like law of attraction, but like confidence and conviction that I deserve this, I belong here. I'm patient. It's all happening, right? He wasn't tripping. There's a difference between waiting and waiting patiently. You can be somewhere and be like in line or whatever. He was chilling. He came because he knew what he was there for. But then he moved after that into entrepreneurship. So he actually started one of the first like medical supply rental companies. So it was like for EMTs or like trucks or equipment and stuff. And so he became an entrepreneur. But yeah, I think that he set a bar for me, not only in the balance of, he was a poet, he was a sculptor, but he was also very stoic and very masculine. So he, I think, ruined me for dating because I think there's just like, they don't make them like him anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But he was this really perfect balance between stoic, stern, masculine, leader, family man, like on that course, right? But also just warm and loving and creative and poetic, and wrote my grandmother a love letter every day, the day that she died until he passed.
Oh my gosh.
Like, they don't make them like him anymore.
Yeah.
But from a professional standpoint, yeah, he also really inspired me. And I didn't know that he was in PR when I went into PR. My family's just like, they're not secretive, but they're just private. And it's almost like you have to know what questions to ask. And, immigrant mentality, like very New England, like whatever. And so I was, I think, in my third year of college in marketing and communications before someone randomly mentioned it at like a Thanksgiving. And I'm like,
oh, this makes sense.
No one thought this was relevant?
Yeah.
And then my sister went into HR, right? And I was in executive recruiting for 3 years before anyone thought it was relevant to let us know that my grandmother previously was the first woman running personnel at Time Inc. Personnel is literally HR. I was like, it was so weird. And I'm just like, subconsciously, I think he affected a lot, personally and professionally.
And I guess in the realm of like identitarianism, so safeguarding, protecting certain groups, you've been a staunch proponent of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Why do you think it's important to kind of have, a diverse array of voices and kind of promulgate and advocate for the underrepresented?
I think that in 2024, how we look at DEI has to change. I think that DEI from a corporate perspective has also become almost like I was saying with Web3, like its own bucket instead of an extension. And I think that we can't look at it as its independent thing. Multicultural marketing doesn't mean black and brown culture. It means multi, right? And I think that a lot of historical decisions that brands have made have either been monochromatic and monolithic and a bit patriarchal in terms of how they treat, race, gender, identity, ethnicity, and whether that's misogyny or racism or xenophobia or just ignorance is bliss because it doesn't affect them. And a lot of the powers that be were traditionally older white men, which may or may not have had negative intentions, but certainly weren't going out of their way to learn, right? We're now in a society where there's a lot more, not enough, but a lot more executive power that is a broader spectrum. So the decision-making power has shifted, but not enough. So as far as DEI goes, I think we have to use that terminology for it to make sense to corporate budgets because a lot of it's performative and a lot of it has to do with the way that they allocate dollars in spends. But if you take all of the performative, opportunistic, optical messaging out of it and you just think about what's good for society and what's good for business, you can even take the humanitarianism out of it. I don't think that it is a social justice crusade. I also am a social justice advocate. I also consider myself an ally and an activist and do as much as I can in the communities that I feel are disenfranchised or don't get the same opportunities. But when it comes to business, it's also lucrative. So when we talk about giving voice or face to populations or communities that are not historically prioritized. And let's call it what it is. In America especially, Black society has not always had celebration rather than appropriation. So a lot of cultural elements have been brought into how brands operate, how entertainers operate, what identity looks like, or recreation or style. But the money isn't coming with it. So I think you really have to take a step back. I think you have to take a step back and look at it from a humanitarian perspective of humanity is better when we all have voice and we all have access to opportunities, and opportunities include finances and resources, and we cannot separate the two because otherwise it's just talk. But I think from a business perspective, diversity is lucrative. Diversity is lucrative. And so if you think about inclusivity from the perspective of it increases audience, it increases brand awareness, it increases affinity, it increases advocacy and agency, it increases brand love, it increases revenue to create more space for more people. Also, the more opportunity that you give for people to be financially free or at least earn instead of just be like, oh, great, you get to be in a campaign, your face is used, but you're also not getting paid equitably. Pay parity is a big thing, right? But that also becomes your consumer because people have more money to spend. So I think there's part one when it comes to inclusivity is brands just need to do a better job of authentic integration and activation in culture and communities that bring value. Whether it's the product offering, whether it's how they are spending on the commercials, the campaigns, the influencer and celebrity partnerships, the ambassadorships, or actually investing in terms of like committing dollars to certain initiatives and programming and activations. That's part one. Part one is like brands just have to do a better job of it. I think part two is recognizing that the more diversity of thought and the more diversity of voice, the better quality of everything.
Of course, yeah.
And so it's not just about like, oh, what's the right thing to do, which of course on a personal level, that's where it comes from, right? I think on a personal level, it comes from a sense of purpose and calling and just the way that I grew up and my priorities. But at the business level, I don't think you have to care as much as me. And I hate to say it like that, but I don't. I don't think you have to make it as important to you as I make it to me, or as people that subscribe to these said communities have no choice but to make it because it's their existence, right? It's a privilege not to have to think about color. It's a privilege not to have to think about gender. As a man in society, not having to worry about feeling safe, that's a luxury. As a white person in society, not have to worry about going into a room and people feeling a certain sense of anything, projection, assumption, fear, stereotypes, that's a luxury. So when we can actually have more leadership and more thoughtfulness and collaborative ideas that come from different experiences, the creative gets better, the quality of the product gets better, the storytelling gets better, and ultimately the programming gets better. So it truly is like all ships rise with the tide. And I think we have to stop looking at it as like doing favors or like doing a good deed. It's not doing a good deed. It's literally just doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we see it.
Yeah.
Like there's times where I'm invited to do a panel and it's like no one even noticed that it's all white people or it's all guys and I'm the token lady, you know?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't think it's intentional. I don't think people are always outrightly seeking to other. They just don't think about other.
I want to jump back to Prince Chef Deluxe. And when you first started out, page 9, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
What did that look like?
We are really dating ourselves this
Going
interview. Whew. That was pre-chat GBT. Yeah, I was very entrepreneurial at a very young age. And it did start in the very obvious like newspaper runs and lemonade stands.
Sure.
But I will say I had a little bit of Nipsey in me in the sense of like my price points were not your standard price points for a lemonade stand because
Expensive lemonade, okay.
Oh yeah, because it was supply and demand. I would do it on like the roadside where there was no restaurants, shops, anything. So I always had a little bit of a disruptor's mindset, I would say, or inflated value. I don't know, but I think that at a very young age, I wanted to create. So it started actually with like poetry and art, and I was a published poet at 7, and I was entering competitions and really loved like painting and charcoal and things. Like I was trying to play the guitar before my hands could like fit around the neck of it, right? And so the artist in me, I think, is what bred the entrepreneur. And it took me a long time to realize that because I actually thought that my entrepreneurialism came from my business mindset because I'm very business oriented. I don't think it came from being the builder. I think my entrepreneurship came from being a creative because I just wanted to make stuff. And so the first companies that I had were art focused. It was like thinking I was going to be the next Hallmark, designing greeting cards and selling them at an absurd price point because I was on demand. So before there was Instacart or Uber Eats or delivery or Amazon, I'd ride around on my little bicycle with my little basket with my 3-inch binder with all my made up printed cards, some of which I colored in, some of which I think I saved up for a color printer. But it was like, you know, it's like a kid, the neighbors are like, yeah, why not? And it's door to door. So the funny thing is, like, I wasn't conceptualizing it like that, but Dare to Dream Cards Incorporated, which somehow was incorporated, but I said was a limited liability corporation, which I don't even know where I learned that. My mom was like, what's an LLC? Like, my mom was even like, she was a teacher. She's like, where did you come up with this stuff? But with Dare to Dream Cards, it was about, I made something I wanted other people to have. It was really that simple. And then I was like, oh, I can make money and then I can go buy candy and toys and do things that I have more freedom. So even at 7 to 9, I looked at money as freedom. It meant I didn't have to ask for permission from my parents. I was kind of, you know, lower middle class family. Like it was, all of our needs were met, but wants we needed to go earn. And, you know, my parents were also just very frugal. It wasn't like, you know, Christmas and Hanukkah were like, we did a lot of donations and socks, right? And so for me, I'm like, if I had things that I wanted, I needed to go earn that. So it gave me a sense of freedom and pride and whatever. So that was the first. And then I like taught myself how to make jewelry and was making a jewelry company. I did estate sales before estate sales where I was flipping yard sales for people that didn't want yard sales. I would just be like, what don't you want?
It's like the OG
I'm going to do a
Gary Vee.
markup,
Yeah.
you know? That's funny. But I was the one producing what he would go buy them from.
Oh, okay.
So I would go door to door to like, I lived in a cul-de-sac with like probably 13 houses. And then there was 3 of these blocks with probably about 15 houses on each one.
Yeah.
And that was the vicinity I was allowed to go by myself at the time. So I went to all the neighbors and I would just be like, what don't you want? And how much would you want for it? And then I would, whatever it was, I didn't question the price. I would just add 20% across the board. And I would say, if I don't sell it, you either get to keep it or I'll arrange for it to get picked up and donated. Because there was like a truck that would come get it. And they were like, okay, because it's free money for them. So they didn't care. I didn't know that was called estate sales. I thought I was just franchising yard sales, right? I don't even know if that was a thing yet. But I would do like 10 of them. And so all of a sudden, again, I was so little that I think people just bought it because they're like, that's adorable, baby boss. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, why not? But I didn't think like that. I thought I was like killing it and I was this like business lady. But I made more money at 12 than I made at 22. Jeez. So I genuinely, hand on heart, like I started a college fund. I bought a Fender guitar and amp, which I couldn't even play because my fingers were like bleeding because I was too little. I bought a stunt bike that my mom was furious with, which is why I have a scar on my chin because I went over the handlebars because I had no brakes.
2 scars, yeah.
Yeah, like I bought a pool table, a ping pong. I like really made money then.
Yeah.
And I saved a lot of it, but it also was like anything I wanted that my parents wanted me to work for, I would just go get. And I think that was where I really realized that having a sense of autonomy or agency was important to me because even though I was super communal, I was super social, I had a really tight-knit family and like just great parents or whatever, I really liked independence and I liked not having to answer to anyone. I liked being able to, make something and something come of it, right? I liked seeing things come to fruition. And none of that meant anything to me back then. But then in my 20s and now my 30s, I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I didn't waste all those years trying to figure out who I was because I knew at 7. You really do know when you're young. I say that all the time, but I mean it, and I could say it 1,000 times. I truly believe if you think about when you were around the age of 7, 8, or if you talk to any 7, 8-year-old, that personality, the things they're passionate about, the things that make them tick, the things that excite them at that time, we spend the rest of our lives coming back to that and figuring out how to make money doing it. Yeah.
And so your parents, they've been together 47 years.
49 now.
Wow. What are some kind of like mantras that they've instilled in you?
My dad was a CEO of nonprofits, but he worked in social work my whole life. But when he became a CEO, you have so much pressure on you, but you also have so much relying on you because it goes from being about you to being about other people's livelihood, right? And so I remember when I first became a CEO and I was still burning the candle at both ends and running myself into the ground and not taking care of my health and not just taking care of my health, taking pride in being last on my to-do list. I had such a martyr complex of like, you can't sleep. If anytime you're sleeping, someone's out working you. Like even working out, like I looked healthy, but I was not healthy. I was like everything was a business meeting and food and this and that. Like I was not taking care of myself. And as a CEO, you are your company's asset. And so that was the best advice my dad ever gave me. The best professional advice my dad ever gave me that affected me personally was that as a CEO, you are a liability or an asset. And if you are not protecting the company's most important asset, you are a liability. And because I had such a sense of like responsibility for everyone, that onus of accountability that if I'm not taking care of my health and my mental health and my like just overall well-being, it could affect our company's bottom line and revenue, but also jobs for other people. That was a wake-up call for me. So that was the best business. He's given me a lot of great business advice, but that was the most impactful business advice because it was such a wake-up call. I don't always do it great, right? But it really made me think about it differently and think about myself more as a commodity than a leader. Because at the end of the day, at some point, as you grow and build, like you might put other CEOs, other executives in place, but it is all about how do you keep the ship running, right? And if the captain is not doing so well, it's not going to go anywhere well.
Yeah.
So that was the best business advice. In terms of personal advice, so I was having a conversation with my mom the other day because I was teasing her. I'm like, you guys are so cute now. Like, they're kissy and sending me pictures and affectionate. But like when I was growing up, like gifts, physical touch, and words of affirmation were not their lead love languages.
Okay.
It was quality time and acts of service.
Acts of service, okay.
And to the point where I'm sure they were, but we were kids. Like, they weren't going to like make out in front of us, right? Ew, gross. But I didn't witness happily married parents that were all over each other or constantly complimenting each other or showering each other with gifts. My mom would be like very utilitarian, like buy me a vacuum or don't buy me anything. Like, she was not, I had to teach my dad to get her flowers. Like, she doesn't want anything. They're they're partners. They're not materialistic. They don't need a bunch of words if there's no actions, right? And while they're affectionate, they weren't going to be like that in front of the kids. So for me, I learned by behavior that absolutely quality service, but no, that acts of service and quality time were like definitions of love. Don't get me wrong. I think everyone want all of them. But in terms of does it translate to you love me versus I like that and it feels good? No. And so I was talking to my mom the other day about it because she was like, that's so interesting. I never thought about that, because in her mind, she's like, we did all of that, but you're right. Those were the things that meant the most to us. But when they got married, it was a different era. My parents got married, and my dad was going to be the breadwinner, and my mom was going to go back to school for her education. And there was massive statewide layoffs in the school systems. My dad was a teacher and a basketball coach at the time, and he got laid off. And so I didn't find out, they'll probably kill me if they see this, but I didn't find out until my 30s that they were on food stamps for the first year of their marriage. My mom was the barely breadwinner, and they had to completely figure it out. But they had decided they were in it. And I think that generation really looked at love as an action, not an emotion. So yeah, they felt love. And they joked that like, I was like, well, why did you know this was the one? And she's like, I don't know. We were always telling each other. It was almost like, I love you. No, I love you. It's like, okay, what you going to do about it? Like literally it was like, are we just going to keep doing this then? Yeah. Right? So it was almost like emotion in action. But I think that they looked at it with less of the Disney complex, idealistic, it's supposed to feel good every day and you want to climb them like a tree and everything's rainbows and sunshine. They knew marriage was hard, but they're teammates. And so the best advice my parents ever gave me was, you need to find the person that you want to be in the trenches with. You can be happy with anyone. Listen, we are happy people that have great lifestyles, access to lots of options, but you could choose someone, because it's a choice, and decide this is my person, and the highlights reel is going to be great no matter what. If they check enough boxes, the good times are going to be great no matter what. Who do you actually want to deal with lifing with? And if you can't go through the hard times with someone that is a partner and a teammate and equally yoked and willing to go to war with you on the same side, then at some point you're going to either lose respect or lose admiration, or love will just wane. And I think that you go through waves of the emotion of love or sexual attraction or all of that over the course of a 20, 30, 40, 50-year marriage. But marriage, whether you put it on paper or not, life partnership, in my mind is about choosing someone that you want to literally do life with. And it's partnership. And I think we're in a society right now where everything is so transactional and everyone is like hurting people or trying not to get hurt. And so, the social media dialogue is around, women, no cheesecake factories and needing more than the bare minimum man and all this stuff. But then men are also like, oh, they're a dime a dozen, all the dating apps, all the this, all the that. There's no good women. They don't cook, they don't clean, they whatever. I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think that everything is about alignment. And so the best advice my dad gave me on relationships was choose someone that you love their warts. And I was like, that's disgusting. What does that mean? He's like, Lise? He calls me Lise or Lisey. He's like, Lisey, you got to love their warts. And I'm like,
that's not a love language, Dad.
Yeah, I'm like, ick. I don't think that's in the book. And his point of view is everyone has their icks, right? And if your non-negotiables or your deal breakers are their idiosyncrasies or quirks, if their quirks are your ick, it's never going to work because it's just going to get bigger as you go. But if the things that you don't really like about them or they don't really like about themselves, you can find endearing or actually like the icks. That's the person. Because my mom has her own quirks, right? My dad loves that shit. When I tell you, I've never met a woman that gets hangrier. And if we say anything bad about my mom, he defends her with the fire of 1,000 suns, even though she's being crazy to him. I'm like, oh, you really like her ick. I get it.
Yeah.
And my mom said something very different. My mom said, there's fixed factors and there's variables in a person. Their personality, their character, their integrity, who someone is, what they are, does not change. And so you cannot expect them to change. They cannot change for you. You have to decide if it aligns with you or it doesn't. Now, behaviorally, those things can change. So you can't like throw the baby out with the bathwater or throw the whole man away if there's certain things that just either they haven't learned yet or you haven't agreed on. It's all about agreements, right? And so it's really about differentiating between what are permanent, what are temporary qualities. And if the temporary qualities are things that you can navigate through, cool. Grow together, work on it, that's fine. But if the permanent qualities are things that you can't get down with or that you don't respect or that are misaligned with your core values, it's never going to work. And so I will summarize that in saying that while they have different perspectives, even on love and marriage, everything is together. They also laugh. They're best friends. My parents are best friends. I don't find anything they find funny except how adorable their giggling is.
Yeah.
They're just on the same page.
Yeah.
And they chose each other. So when things got hard and they've had their own ups and downs of like where we were financially or whose job or who whatever, they just knew that we're going to see it through together. And so when you decide there's no out, I think that you have to grow as a person. And I think we also in this generation fall in love with how we feel about someone instead of how they make us feel. And so, and I'm honestly, I do this too. Like, I think we all do, where I see all of this potential or I love all of these qualities about you. And some of them might be valid. They might actually be shared values, wanting the same, having the same life vision, having amazing chemistry and compatibility and friendship and connection. But are they treating you in ways that make you feel good? Because you're not going to have someone else make you happy, right? But I think we forget to turn that mirror sometimes and be like, okay, I love how I make you feel, and I love how I feel about you, and I love how I feel about me.
Yeah.
But do I love how you make me feel that you feel about me? And that's where I think there's a difference between being in love and behaving in love. And I think it's really hard. I really do. I struggle with this. I think it's hard because when you know someone deeply loves you, and if they're not acting in the ways that you receive love or need love or even think are bare minimum requirements or common sense, if you don't talk about it and you don't have trust and honesty and a foundation of really open communication, you have nothing. And so I think that's where it gets tricky because it's like, oh, but there's so much love. And it's like, right, but if these are your love languages and they are not fluent, something's got to give, sacrifice, compromise, or just sucking it up and being okay with it.
Yeah.
And if their attachment style is dismissive and yours is anxious, or you trigger each other with your child wounds, like you either do the work personally, independently, and maybe therapy, or you don't. But feeling like you love someone a lot doesn't build a marriage and it doesn't build a foundation for, partnership.
That was my next question, actually, like health and wellness. So for you, sleep, any like supplement, anything that you do that kind of like optimizes your daily life right now?
That's a great question too. So this past year, like my entire focus was health and wellness.
Okay.
I'm a bit of an extremist, and so my trying to integrate and implement with moderation wasn't working. And I really needed to take a step back and cut out all the noise, sacrifice a lot of like social season and entertainment and whatever to really just focus on what do I need to optimize me. And my only goal this past year was getting to my healthiest mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. That was it. And I wanted to build the agency, I wanted to be successful, I wanted to consider dating, all these things, but nothing else outside of my integrity and my wellness was my priority. And with that, everything else fell into place. So the more attention I put on getting more sleep, working out pretty much every day for a year, even if that meant yoga or stretching or walking. I've basically been active every single day since last December. Getting a puppy that's really fun and keeps me young, even though he's probably aging me. All these things were grounding. And I had to stay home with an accident thing, whatever, for 6 months. And I had never stayed home for 6 months in 10 years. I travel a lot, and even when I'm not traveling 80% of the time, even if it's like 40%, being home for a month straight was unheard of.
Yeah.
Unheard of. So how do you really build the foundation of anything on a personal, domestic level, much less dating someone locally? I was in a long-distance relationship if I dated anyone anywhere because I was never home.
Yeah.
So I will say, well, it's not supplements. I do think that I tried to go a little bit greener, a little bit more holistic, a little bit more natural in the sense of listening to my body. I do take vitamins. I do a lot of like juicing, and I love like all the basics, right? Like apple cider vinegar and chlorophyll and like nothing crazy. But I think it was just the attention. I really think that all the rest of it was like, I don't even know if vitamins do anything. It was the rhythm of taking my vitamins every day because it was an investment in myself. It was investing in those massages instead of shoes or whatever it might be. Really prioritizing anything for my physical health and well-being. Reading more, starting to write again for the first time literally since college, buying art supplies, starting to sketch again. All of the things that made me as an identity, I had stopped doing because I was just busy.
Yeah.
So I would say this past year, in terms of 2023, it was a full recalibration year for me. And it was not about what was I implementing, it was what was I extracting. It was about clearing, decluttering, removing, setting better boundaries of my time and people, and also trusting that my relationships were strong enough that if I went off the map, I went cold turkey on festivals, panels, conferences, being in the mix, having the FaceTime, shaking the hands, rubbing the elbows, right? Rubbing elbows, rubbing shoulders? I forget.
Shoulders, almost the same thing.
Rubbing arms.
Yeah.
I think that we have a fear, not of FOMO, but I think we have a fear of being forgotten at times. And I realized that I didn't have a fear of missing out because I don't care. I'm always happy wherever I am. I'm very be where my feet are. But I was worried that I would be obsolete or forgotten and not be the first call for a panel or for a marketing agency of record or just not top of mind if I disappeared. But I had to. And I needed to just take a break. And I didn't take a break from work, but I took a break from being present for everyone else. So it was very isolating, honestly, and I was a little bit reclusive, but it felt like a grounding, anchoring year when I was in the wind as a sail. Now, going into 2024 and it being sort of winding down of Q1, I feel like I'm able to have a little more balance. And so because that is so solid and I'm so clear and I'm so decluttered, I have room to be more social. I have room to do more business development, and I have more capacity to be excited about educating and learning again. And so I think you just have to be patient with those waves. And I do think that the basics are more important than any of the trends. For me, optimal wellness means getting 7-8 hours of sleep instead of 4 to 5, right? Drinking enough water, and good water, alkaline water or water from glass bottles or frequency enhanced, like whatever it is. Most water is making us dehydrated, but hydrating properly, better skincare, better fitness and everything, but just tune-ups. Like we are machines like anything else, and it needs maintenance. And you would never go 5 years without getting your car checked or having your house checked, right? Your body is a vessel, just like everything that we ride in. Cars, homes, boats, planes, trains, and automobiles. If you think about it like that, you would tune it up more, and you would at least check internally more, do an inventory check, right? And so we're just spirits and meat puppets. And if you look at your body as a vehicle, then you'll treat it like an instrument. And you don't have to be like, oh, I'm a temple and all these things. But it's your machine, and it's up to you to well oil it.
Meditation? Do you meditate?
Every day.
I can tell you kind of
Every day.
Calm demeanor.
Honestly, throughout the day. I have a very fiery personality, but a very calm, grounded energy. But it's easy for me to get, not frenetic, but like, I'm passionate. I love people. So I really have to ground because I'm also a very absorbent empath, and I take on a lot of emotions and experiences physically. And it manifests in stomach issues, back issues.
Wow.
Like I was having really bad physical ailments, some of which were my own anxiety and others were just surrounding myself with the wrong people, places, and things.
Sure.
So from a meditation standpoint, I'm a massive advocate for it because we, the busiest, say we can't.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation is not about figuring it out. It's literally clearing. And so my best meditations, I meditated for an hour and a half this morning instead of going to the gym, instead of cooking breakfast, instead of doing all the things I planned to do, because I had such a chaotic week in terms of really exciting business development and pitches and client deliverables and new team members that we're training. But also we went to a concert with clients and I had a business dinner and my friend had a comedy show. Like I haven't been out of the house outside of the gym or a coffee shop in a while. So all of a sudden my social battery was drained and my intellectual capacity was like on overload. So I just reset, and it was not frequency music or healing or a practice. It was literally just breath work and clearing on rotation over and over again. And it released stuff in my body that would have taken an hour in the sauna. It just releases you.
Do you view it as almost like the automaticity of your thoughts, getting a macro perspective on those thoughts versus like almost like the bifurcating between you either get subsumed in your thoughts or you have this kind of presence, awareness or consciousness of those thoughts?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't say it better. Yes.
Okay.
I think that I think that was perfectly said. I think that what he thinks about is around awareness, right? Acknowledgement. And even when you're talking about physical stuff, pain you have to lean into versus avoid. Metaphor for life, right? But I'm talking physical pain. And he talks about needing to like literally just align with it and be aware, and it'll ultimately pass if you accept it. Most of our problems in life are from resistance. It's not anything else. And judgment. And so if something is going wrong, if we're spinning out because we don't like something or we can't solve something, or if we cringe or feel scared or anxious, or whatever the thing is, the reason it starts feeling a certain way is because we are allocating and attributing a judgment to it. So when I'm training someone for public speaking, because I do a lot of media training as well, what I always ask them is, have you ever felt excited? And I know that sounds ridiculous, but when someone's about to go on stage and they're so anxious and they're so nervous and everything is spinning, it's because you're attributing it as a negative sensation. So I'm always like, have you ever been excited? And I'll bring them to a place of the equivalent of the Christmas morning or the promotion or that moment when you're like, right? The moment. It's the exact same physiological reaction. Your body reacts the same to anxiety and fear as excitement. And so, well, the only change is if it's a neutron, electron, or proton. Something has either a neutral charge, a negative charge, or a positive charge. So when you're at peace and you are just Zen, right? Zen is also not about being calm. Zen is being aligned with whatever emotion you're in. So if you're angry and you're allowing yourself to feel angry, you're at Zen, you're at peace. So peace is neutral. So you're not necessarily feeling much of anything. You're just there, right? That's presence, present moment awareness, completely here now. You're not anticipating good or bad the future, nor judging the past. You're just here. You can't have a charge.
Yeah.
But if you're excited, it's because you have a positive association with what is about to come. And if you are anxious or nervous, it's because you have a negative association or a fear of what is about to come. Both are experiences and allocations or attributions of judgment on the unknown. And so if you can figure out how to change the charge, you can go from feeling like you're about to pee your pants going on stage or freak out to, oh my gosh, I get to be here, not I have to be here.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
Even when you wake up, if you're in a bad mood, it's the difference between, oh, I've got to get up to I get to get up.
Yeah.
And there's no physical difference really. So I think that when you ask, is it more of like almost the silent witness, I'll say, like the third party observer or the experiencing creator? I think it's both, but I think that our emotions are, within men and women, are feminine, right? Our mind is our masculine. And so there's a dominance and a penetration and a ruler in that controls us. We don't have control of our mind. And so when it's going crazy, even when you're being thoughtful and trying to figure something out, that's actually disempowering because you're not doing it. It's being done. Whereas if you can take that step back and just watch, let your mind do whatever it needs to do, watch it pass like clouds in the sky and observe it and release the need to decide what it means. You don't have to know what it means. You don't have to figure it out. And I am a reforming, healing, recovering, rehabbing know-it-all, right? So wild overthinker, highly cerebral. And so it is very difficult for me to get out of my head. But that's also the difference between, again, switching from negative to positive. It's the difference between affirmations and integrations. Your affirmations, you can tell yourself whatever you want, and it's good because there's power in words and there's power in thought. But I might think like, I love you, you're great, this, that, or the other in the mirror every day. But if I don't believe it in my body, it's not integrated.
Yeah.
Eventually it might, and it's good to repeat, right? Repetition, redundancy. But like, you actually have to do the work to believe what you're saying. And so I think belief is the most powerful thing on the planet. I think that whatever your religion, whatever your coping mechanisms, whatever your modalities for healing are, I don't care what you call it, it's all the same to me because I think that we're always trying to get back to neutral, not mania or depression, not happy or sad, not good or bad, not extracting or adding, not expanding or contracting. Literally nirvana, the top of the triangle, if you will, is the peace. I want peace. And whether that's in my business, in my relationships, in my personal life, I don't want explosions, right? Like I actually think, when you're talking about relationships, and this is not my original thinking, but I forget who told me, but I always look at it as, we always think we want fireworks. We want the fireplace. And some of us have forest fires and other versions along the way, right? But like, fireworks are great, but it's not long lasting. They gone. The fireplace is the hearth, the home, right? And so I think that when we're thinking about, the meditation and affirmations and all of that, and part one for me is affirming beliefs. And then part two is all of the law of manifestation, law of attraction, law of assumption, whether you're in like kind of the neo-spiritual community or very Christian or Jewish or any other religion, anywhere in the world, the only thing that everything says is about belief and believing that it is done. Every religious, I won't say every, but most religious documents and books even talk about trust and faith, right? Whatever leader, whatever God that you worship, it's about believing that it is written, believing that it is done, not that it's going to happen, not even that it's happening, but that it's done. When you set your vision board or when you're doing certain things, they always tell you to put it in the present tense or the past tense, right? Because it's not a conditional, I will, or if this happens, or I hope to. There's nothing active about wishing. But if you've decided that it's done, even if it seems delusional, that belief is more powerful than anything. And I think that the greatest thing that we can do for each other is believing in each other. And I think the greatest compliment anyone can ever give you is belief and trust. Whether it's trust in your word and your integrity and that your words and actions align, or whether it's just belief in your capacity and your potential and seeing more in you than you see in yourself. I just think that, I truly think that belief is a superpower.
Love that. Last question, your last favorite 3 books that you read.
Oh, my favorite last 3 books. Okay. I'm reading Thick Face, Black Heart, which is an Asian business book that at first I was not super into because it felt very 48 Laws of Power, Machiavellian, but the way that the author breaks it down and applies it in different levels of sophistication is so brilliant and so simple. And it's about detaching from your identity and image is the thick face part. And the black heart is sort of the, not the end justifies the means, but like really the end goal, needing to be more practical and less emotional in business. So thick face, black heart. I'm currently reading Blue Ocean Strategy, which is an oldie but goodie. And Bob Francis actually had recommended it to me probably a decade ago. He was Big Bob is Nipsey Hussle's mentor, and he actually credited him for this particular book and this thinking around when he dropped the sort of original analog NFTs, I like to call it, but the album that was high priced, low volume was modeling after this idea of like supply and demand, scarcity, et cetera. But yes, so Blue Ocean Strategy, great marketing book,
Cool.
working on that. And then I'm actually reading About Love again. I love the love language books and Attached and all of that. I honestly, I study love and relationships just like I study business, and had just read, shout out to Jay Shetty, but Jay Shetty's 8 Simple Rules of Love. I think it's 8 Rules of Love. But I think all of these books are all applicable in business and relationships. But yeah, I would say, so About Love, Blue Ocean Strategy, and Thick Face Black Heart are probably the top 3, either reading or rereading.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for the really smart, thoughtful, insightful questions. Not that I would expect anything less, but I really feel like you got me thinking and like having to really like reconsider a lot of it.
I appreciate it. Where can people find you?
First of all, Loop. We're at loopstudios.com, LOOPstudios.com. Okay. On social, I am at Ginger Jacobs, GingerJacobs, everywhere. Nice. And then Loop is at Loop Says, LOOPSAYS. And you can also always find anything up to date in terms of like we do different event series and like really fun client wins. But spoiler alert, because we have not announced this yet, but next week we are actually relaunching the Loop Report, which is our newsletter, but it's really actually like an editorial publication. It's awesome. It's different interviews and spotlights and industry news, some client wins, but less about Loop and more about culture. So if anyone wants to get on that mailing list or anything, you just send us your email. But I'm really excited about that one. Cool. We have some awesome features for March.
Well, thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Shout out to Julian Banks. Yes, sir. And I am Big Snoop Dogg.